Hi. It's always really difficult to not be overly critical or cognizant of like your appearance and how you look when you try to do these things. But honestly, it's just more about me speaking and trying to get my thoughts out on paper. I got very interesting responses about my first ever video upload, like the last video I uploaded on Substack, and also a few inquiries from my friends about why I put it on Substack. They were all really well-meaning comments. For example, like my friend Noah was like, you should post it on YouTube. Like you get much more views, and like, like I feel like it'll be easier for like people to like engage with it. And it's not just him, like other people also like said, put it on like TikTok. Like I feel like this kind of content does really well on TikTok. And I feel like it's really made me think again of like, why did you want to post it on Substack, and what is it you're trying to make out of this? Which is another thing that a friend asked me as well. She was like, so, I saw your video, it was great. But like, was it for work? Like, what was it for? Like for school, for work? Like, why did you, which I kind of laughed at, and I was like, no, it's not for work. I don't know, like the thing we learn in media is like the medium is the message. I feel like TikTok and YouTube are inherently platforms now that people come onto to passively consume. And I don't think anyone puts things on TikTok and YouTube for them to be passively consumed, but that's just inherently the attitude that surrounds these kind of platforms now. Actually, there were just two essays I wanted to talk about recently that I read, and I just wanted to share kind of like my thoughts on them and how I've been implementing them in my life. I've been trying to push myself more to do this. One is to just kind of like gain kind of wisdom from different people and their writings, and also as like a thought exercise for myself. The first thing, it was actually a really old essay that I found through Archive Today. Pretty much I found this website because I was trying, it's kind of bad because, I'm like, an aspiring writer, so I should be wanting to like, for people to get paid. But the New York Times is a greedy corporation. Like, how are you going to put an essay from 12 years ago behind a paywall? I don't know. I find it annoying. Anyway, I went on Reddit being like, how do I get past like New York Times paywall? Anyway, that's how I found this essay called The Moral Bucket List. And it's an opinion piece for the New York Times written by David Brooke. And it's from 2015. He's basically trying to sum up or analyze what are certain qualities about people that he's come across that he admires. What is it about them? It's clear that they've done inner work to arrive at this character that he really admires, but like what kind of work is that and how does it look? He himself, as the writer, he wants to arrive at a place that's more moralistic, and he has these certain virtues or values rather that he wants to arrive at. And how does he do that? And so he frames it in two ways. He says that everyone kind of has virtues in them actually, but there's two kinds of virtues. There's resume virtues and there's eulogy virtues. So resume virtues are kind of like the skills that people bring to the marketplace, which everyone needs because we live in a capitalist society. So it could be anything, like whatever you're good at. That's not really what he's talking about here. He's talking about more so what he frames as eulogy virtues, which are pretty much whether you are kind, brave, or honest. They're pretty much the virtues or values or characteristics about you that will be talked about, for instance, like at your funeral. And so basically what he's endeavoring to talk about here is about inner character and how people arrive at their inner character. How do people define what their inner character is? Is it something that they arrive at through a lot of introspection, which he comes to find out is true? Or is it just something that people are made and become, which is not really the case actually at all? And what I'm talking about here as I'm going on, it's not really matters of like whether someone arrives at being moral through like a spiritual framework, which I find that usually when we talk about morality, that's kind of the context that most people talk about it in, is whether like you're a spiritual or religious person. But actually everyone has moral codes that they live by, and you don't necessarily need religion in order to find those certain moral codes. I think religion has a much bigger mission or role to serve than just making you a moral person. And the whole reason this opinion piece even resonated with me in the first place is because I've been thinking a lot as well about values and how I arrived at my personal values. Pretty much this idea was quite foreign to me a few years ago, actually. It only came by way of therapy and talking to my therapist about how I found it really difficult. This was in my very early 20s. I think I was 22 or 23 when I started doing therapy like really consistently and like doing a lot of that, like that inner work from like your childhood and blah, blah, blah. And so I was in my early 20s at the time, and I think the one question I really had that I wanted to figure out is how do I arrive, firstly, at like, who am I as a person and what do I want? Like, how do I arrive at the answers for these two questions? And basically, she said, well, there's many ways to do that by, but mostly the way that I would recommend is by you finding out what your values are. So what are your values? Like, what do you value out of life? And, you know, I was like buffering, like I didn't know, like I never thought about it. I really struggled in that moment to kind of name even 4 or 5 values, like, or virtues, I guess, that I really admire and that I would characterize as being like Fadzai's values, you know. And so after that session, I got home and I kind of typed in values in Google. Like, large list of values came up, and I thought, like, I guess I just pick one that resonates or that sounds nice. Is that how I do this, you know? But later on, I got to find that people arrive at their values by actually doing a lot of introspection and a lot of inner work, which is also what the writer in this opinion piece goes on to say. But all the people I ever deeply admired are profoundly honest about their own weaknesses. They have identified their core sin, whether it's selfishness, the desperate need for approval, cowardice, heartedness, or whatever. They have traced how the core sin leads to their behavior that makes them feel ashamed. They have achieved a profound humility, which has been best defined as intense self-awareness. I don't know. What I'm finding is that, like, in order to find your values, it requires a lot of self-confrontation, a lot of internal interest, a lot of introspection, a lot of internal work, and like self-reflection, which I find is quite difficult to achieve, especially now when people don't really get time to be quiet with their thoughts, and how people think that in order to be quiet with your thoughts, you need to like sit down and like child's pose or like something like that. But there's just so many things vying for our attention. Like, our minds are constantly they're kind of like the new venture that be trying to be colonized. It's kind of difficult to arrive at these kind of conversations within ourselves because our minds are so busy all the time. We never really have time for self-reflection or introspection. And sometimes we don't really find it valuable. But I think if we really want to be people who know ourselves well and people who are really self-assured in what we value and so forth, I think, one, it's really important then to kind of have those times or moments where we do kind of self-reflect. And so for me, speaking of values, I'm not going to like give out the list or anything, but there's certain values that I definitely have that I've written down too. And I didn't just arrive at them because, oh, they sound nice, you know, that's why I like them, or like they're admirable or they're aspirational, which of course they are, but that's not the way I arrived at finding out that these are my values. But it was through a lot of intense self-reflection and looking at the different timelines of my life and being like, okay, well, if I admire humility, for example, which is true, humility is one of my virtues, what does that look like? To me, humility has always, it's not like degrading yourself or it's not self-flagellation. Like, for me, that's never been what humility looks like to me. Humility has always expressed itself through vulnerability. I have found that I have been the most humble in my life when I have been the most vulnerable in my life. And likewise, outwardly, I've always admired or counted people to be humble when they have this amazing ability to be completely vulnerable. Because I think true vulnerability can only come from self-admittance of your own kind of, here the writer calls them as like core sins. Basically things you don't really like about yourself and kind of working through them. I think true vulnerability is like true self-confidence. I think that's what true confidence looks like. And the opposite of that, which is what I really despise in myself and in different people, is arrogance. But what does arrogance look like to me? Arrogance has always looked like the opposite, which is the ability to not be vulnerable. And ultimately, I think that comes from, this is just me psychoanalyzing other people and myself. I think people who are arrogant in my eyes are people who have a lot of shame, actually, a lot of really deep shame, but they repress that shame. And so in order to repress it, what do they mask it with? They mask it with arrogance. And arrogance kind of becomes like bravado, where they are so fearful to be vulnerable, so fearful to be critical of themselves. So then they become super critical of other people. And I was even having like this conversation with my friend, and we were talking about how the people we find to be the most kind of judgmental or condescending actually carry around a lot of shame inside, or like this judgment and this hypercriticalness of other people. kind of oozes out of them because they have so much repressed shame. For me, if I had to realize, okay, well then that's what arrogance looks like, and that's how I define arrogance in my life, then if humility is really a value of mine, then how then do I arrive at that kind of humility? How do I express it? I have to try to be more vulnerable. Not only vulnerable with myself, but vulnerable in front of other people as well. Closest friends of mine, closest family members, admitting that I'm wrong. All of these things, you know what I mean? Like all of these like virtues and values that are like, that we admire in people, but we don't realize just how much internal work it takes. It was really interesting that he gave this example of Dwight Eisenhower, for example, who is a president, I guess, an American president, and how he basically, through a lot of introspection, came to the example that like, I really don't like my anger, and how I kind of really admire more temperaments. Temperaments is like a value for me, like an even temperament. That's something I really value, but I don't possess that. So what do I do? He would do silly things to tame his anger. He took the names of the people he hated, wrote them down on slips of paper, tore it up, and threw them into the garbage. So it was these like, small little exercises once he realized what his value was. And how did he realize his value? By kind of through self-introspection, realizing the things he doesn't like about himself, and then the opposite of that becomes his values. And I think this kind of work is what needs to be done on a larger societal level in order for us to really kind of confront a lot of these different issues that we're seeing now, especially with our generation, because it really happens on this really molecular level. Actually, it's really, I think a lot of these things seem like very woo-woo, but I really think that the change that we want happens on this kind of level, on this really molecular kind of level, through only self-introspection. That when you endeavor to change yourself, I think that's when you see that change culturally and that shift culturally as well. So yeah, I don't know if that made sense at all, but that's just one thing I've been thinking about. I would just encourage you to like read the whole essay. It was really interesting as well. And then the next final thing was talking about craftsmanship, actually. But basically they did an essay what they believe are the tenets of good craftsmanship. And obviously, as someone who's a creative person, someone who considers himself an artist, I think craftsmanship is important, but I had to kind of reevaluate through this essay, what exactly is craftsmanship? Because when I think about craftsmanship, I think about the ethos of craftsmanship, usually when it applies to like luxury items or kind of like bespoke furniture, but never really on the small scale levels that I practice my art at. I don't really push myself to think of myself as a craftsman. I'm not really in my mind thinking like, how can I make this properly and how can I make this as skillfully as possible? Which is basically what the essay was saying, was that like craftsmanship is basically the ethos to apply yourself wholeheartedly and fully to anything that you make. That's what craftsmanship is. So here, basically in the essay, the writer says, I think the most important attribute to becoming a craftsman is the desire to make things exceptionally well. But really, the ethos or the fundamental idea is just, how can I make what I'm going to produce the best it can possibly be? And so for Christmas, for example, I decided to make a gift for my friends, and it was going to be a calendar that I was going to hand design and write and print and the whole thing. And at first I was going to do it like really cavalier and just kind of like make something quick and just like print it off and be like, Merry Christmas, and give it over. But then after thinking about this idea of how I can consider myself a craftsman from the very small things, such as like a small Christmas gift from my friends, how really can I try to apply every design and writing principle that I know in my body and really make it and like output it into like a really beautiful and considered gift for my friends. And I think in this way, I would be living by that ethos of craftsmanship. I won't share it completely. I have some of it here. But yeah, even down to like the illustrations that I did. This is one of the pages. I don't actually have the full thing because I never printed one for myself. But even down to like the font sizes that I used and the illustrations that I made, and I don't know, even like the different quotes and stuff like that I put. Like I put so much time and effort into like illustrating everything and like making sure the colors pop and like making it something that's quite nice, and like putting like a goal tracker. And I really, usually I wouldn't really be someone who tries so hard on such a small thing, but I think that's the idea of what craftsmanship is trying really hard to be perfect at the small things. You know, when we look at something that's really well made, it's because even the smallest detail has been considered, and how we can all be craftsmen by just trying to put our utmost effort and precision in everything that we make. And then, yeah, that's pretty much how we can also be considered as craftsmen in a way. The last thing I want to talk about is photography, and more so black and white photography. I was just really inspired by this photo book. It's basically a series of photos taken over 8 summers in the mythic landscape of the far southeast coast of New South Wales. And the photography in here is like so beautiful and breathtaking. And I've been thinking a lot, especially about why necessarily black and white photos are so beautiful. I think sometimes we can think of black and white photography as being, I don't know, maybe a little bit pretentious or taking itself too seriously. Which, I don't know, I think looking at these photos, that's not at all what I see, actually. I think it's just taking it down to like the bare bones and how really you're forced to kind of pay attention to every detail, whether it's like of the landscape or the subject or the portrait. And so I've been having a lot of fun taking black and white photos through this one app called Kala. It's a South Korean app. They have the most beautiful filters on there. You can tell that they're really considered. So you can only take photos through the app. Like you can't upload it like a already existing photo and then edit it. No, like you have to take it only through the app and only in that moment. And it takes like 5 seconds for like the shutter to like work. So it really feels considered. Like it helps you to like slow down and like really consider like the photos that you're going to take. And so I was really inspired through this book in order to like take a little bit more photos, black and white photos, but in the moment, knowing that they're going to be black and white. And it really makes you consider exactly what you're going to take. And it's funny because my favorite movie, oh, okay, I hate saying my favorite movie because that's like really definitive, but one of my favorite movies is Coffee and Cigarettes by Jim Jarmusch. And even the scenes in that are really awesome. Not necessarily because they're black and white, but because they're considered. And I feel like when things are black and white, even for me, I made a short film some years ago that was black and white. And one of the things is that when you're framing a shot or when you're trying to capture a moment, you really have to consider everything, like whether it's interesting enough in order for it to be preserved in black and white. Because sometimes a shot won't be interesting, but like the colors can be really interesting in the shot, even if the subject isn't. But here, when it's black and white, there's the complete removal. Like the subject that you're taking has to be interesting. The photos you're taking have to be moving in a way in order for people to pay attention to them. And it's quite meditative and just nice. And I've been liking the app. It's really great. I've had it for a while, but I just reopened it again and started using it to take more black and white photos, and it's been really fun. So yeah, hopefully things will be a bit more interesting. I have somewhere to be. I really have somewhere to go, so I'm going to wrap it up here. I don't really know if I said anything interesting, but yeah, okay.